joining us, and take it away.
Great. Thanks, Nikki. Ironically, one of my neighbors just started mowing his lawn, so hope that's not too loud in the background. I am Erika Johnson, and I coordinate the WSU Extension Clark County Master Gardener Program. And our mission is to engage university-trained volunteers to empower and sustain diverse communities with relevant, unbiased, research-based horticulture and environmental stewardship education. Upon completion of 60 hours of intense training, Master Gardener volunteers serve the community, putting their knowledge and passion into action. And they do things like presentations and trainings for both youth and adults. They staff our answer clinic. We'll talk a little bit about that more here later on. And they do tabling at events, take care of demonstration sites that we have across the county, and so much more. A favorite quote of mine with modification of pronouns is as follows: "Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together, all things connect." The actions that we take in our home gardens can have a direct impact on those with whom we share the web of life, both positive and negative. We can make our landscapes welcoming and supportive of wildlife, providing food, water, shelter, and space. And we can take care not to pollute the land, air, and water. Some of our actions, however, may result in harm to our land, air, and water, and the wildlife that depends on these places. Improper use of pesticides may result in their flowing off our property into the streets, down the storm drain, and directly into our streams and lakes, where they can harm the creatures living there. These toxins also pose a threat to human health. The photo on the right is of freshwater mussels. They're primary consumers in aquatic habitats, very susceptible to pollutants as they filter the water that runs through their bodies. And they in turn are consumed by muskrats, otters, raccoons, ducks, heron, fish, and others. An improper use of fertilizers, such as in the photo on the left, which I took just a few weeks ago, where the pellets were allowed to spill out onto the sidewalk, may also result in their movement down the street, down the drain, and into our surface water, where they will promote the growth of algae. Excess algae consumes oxygen in the water, making it unavailable to the fish and aquatic invertebrates, and creating dead zones, which may result in serious environmental and human health issues. The picture on the right is of Lacamas Lake during recent toxic algae blooms. The goals for this talk are to share some techniques for managing garden problems without the use of pesticides. I'll also talk a little bit about effective use of pesticides should their use be deemed necessary. And lastly, I'll provide some tips on effective use of fertilizers. All of the information I'm going to share tonight is based on research. You can find evidence-based information by choosing your information sources carefully. For example, literature published by universities or professional organizations that adhere to scientifically proven methods and peer review. When doing internet searches, I highly recommend that you include the term university or .edu if you'd like to get an extension service, or extension in your search terms. And adding WSU or OSU make it particularly helpful because they have information that's relevant to our climate. And Tucker here has fallen asleep on the Master Gardener Training Manual, which is actually available as a reference in our local library. So let's get to it. Let's start by defining our term. Garden pest. Garden pests are essentially any living thing that spreads disease, causes destruction, or is otherwise a nuisance. Examples might include insects, moles, fungi, and weeds, and you might recognize some of them here. The tree at the top left is suffering with black knot, a fungal disease that results in hard, swollen black galls on the branches, and it looks rather unsightly. However, some trees can withstand the problem, while others may not. The top picture on the right is from my garden, squash bugs, clearly affecting my poor squash. The bottom picture on the right is of lesser celandine, which is a terribly invasive weed which has taken over our backyard. And on the bottom left, molehills, the bane of many a croquet player to be sure. Let's launch the poll and take a little quiz here. Natalie, if you would go ahead and launch the poll. Let's see. Okay, just a single question. What approximate percentage of the world's insects are considered pests of humans? Okay, so the answer is A, 2%. The vast majority of insects, vertebrates, fungi, and other microscopic critters and plants are not considered pests. They're either beneficial or neutral in relation to humans. Such is the case with the myriad fungi and bacteria that are essential in breaking down organic matter, such as in the compost pile in the top right picture. Lady beetles are not only fun to look at, but they're voracious predators of some of our garden pests like aphids. Whether or not something is a pest depends on who you ask. More than a couple folks that I know love having deer visit their gardens. The best way to manage pests is to not get them in the first place. Cultural controls are things that you can do to stave off pests. First up under cultural controls, choose disease and or pest-resistant varieties. Some plants like tomatoes can be very prone to developing certain diseases, but there are varieties that you can choose that have resistance to these problems. The tag will indicate which, if any, have resistance via these disease resistance codes. Our tomato growers out there may recognize some of these problems. If you've experienced them before, you may want to seek out varieties with these codes on them. Verticillium, Fusarium, nematodes, you can see how the code corresponds with the disease or pest. But please note that resistance doesn't mean 100%. It just means that they're less likely to get it and less likely to suffer greatly. Next up is avoid plants that are prone to problems. Peaches, apricots, nectarines, these are classic. They don't do well in Western Washington. They're very prone to serious diseases and several insect pests. The list here is a nice compendium of problems that we consider when our answer clinic gets questions about sick peaches. You can see the list is very long. If you decide to grow these plant types, you must realize that you're committing to battling with very serious diseases and plan your time and energy accordingly. If you've already got plants in your garden that are prone to certain problems, consider replacing them. I remember several years back when a couple of new pests arrived in Clark County around 2004-05, the azalea and rhododendron lacebugs. They use their piercing, sucking mouth parts to suck the juices out of the leaves, and the result are sad-looking, bleached-out plants. Rather than do battle with them, many gardeners made the decision to remove these specimens and replace them with another plant not susceptible to the lacebugs. Some varieties of rhododendrons and azaleas seem to be much more susceptible than others, so don't be afraid to edit your garden if need be. Consider adjusting your tolerance level or your definition of a pest. Moss is a great example, friend or foe. Nice looking lawn in the picture on the left, right? But look a little closer and you'll see it includes moss. Some people get really irritated and become engrossed in battling it. Others tolerate it or even appreciate it. My advice is to pick your battles. When I look at moss, I can't help but thinking about one of the coolest animals I know, the tardigrade, a microscopic critter that makes its home in moss. I mean, seriously, how could you not love a face like that? They're commonly known as water bears. Healthy plants are able to withstand some exposure to pests and diseases. If you have selected a plant that's well suited to its environment and it gets the care that it needs through your watering and nutrition, it will be more likely to stave off minor problems, such as aphids. However, aphids are attracted to plants that are stressed out. One source of stress that we often see is application of too much nitrogen fertilizer. Over-fertilized plants attract insects that feed on plant juices. For those who don't like the idea of tolerating moss in the lawn, this technique, practicing right plant, right place, right care, may serve to illustrate why you have moss in the lawn. It may in fact be the right place, or the right plant in the right place and getting the right care. That is, if your lawn is under shade, if it's excessively wet and poor draining and of poor soil fertility, and if you're mowing too short and have bare patches. You'll want to mitigate these conditions if you want your lawn to be moss-free. And you can do that by carrying out the practices on the list on the left. They include provide sunlight, ensure good drainage, mow high and frequently, removing no more than 1/3 of the grass blades each time, and by fertilizing and irrigating effectively. That brings us to another tip for avoiding pesticides: support beneficial predators. If you see phloem-feeding insects, such as aphids that feed on the plant juices, and you can wait it out a bit, you might pleasantly be surprised to see predatory insects arrive on the scene, such as these juvenile lady beetles. They feed heavily on aphids, with juveniles like these consuming up to 50 of them a day. Think of pests like aphids as baby food, or as some say, the Skittles of the insect world, a source of quick energy for a growing lady beetle. Let's do another quiz. Natalie, if you could go ahead and display the poll. Another percentage question: what percentage of songbirds feed their young a diet of insects? 2%, 14%, 32%, or 96%? I can't see any action, so I'm assuming that folks are still taking the poll. Okay. Oh, there, now I can see. Yes, you guys got it. 96% of songbirds feed their young insects exclusively. So it's a great reason to have these aphids around so that you can provide that baby food. If you believe your plants are experiencing a problem, either a disease or a pest, it's really important that you confirm an accurate diagnosis. It's not uncommon for someone to contact our answer clinic and ask for advice on managing a pest or disease and have it turn out that what they thought was a pest really wasn't. Our answer clinic volunteers are happy to help confirm a diagnosis or to suggest resources you can use to make your own diagnosis. Proper identification of the problem can be interesting and rewarding. It can also be challenging and frustrating. In order to do so, you must be a good observer. You'll need to note details about the problem, including how, when, and where it manifests, and be prepared to describe the signs and symptoms in detail. Signs are evidence of the perpetrator of the problem. Slime trails provide evidence of slugs or snails. You've probably seen this in your garden. Honeydew is a sticky liquid that some insects excrete when they consume large quantities of plant juices. That's the one in the middle. Chewing in the photo at the top right is evidence of grazing. And fungus, as in the powdery mildew on the lilac on the bottom right, are very good signs in detecting the source of the problem. So watching for signs is a really good way to start figuring out what is going on. You can also watch for symptoms. Symptoms are a plant's reaction to stress. Some examples of symptoms include chlorosis or yellowing. The rhododendron on the left is experiencing pretty significant chlorosis. In the second picture, we see the symptom dieback or necrosis of the tip. This is where the tip of the plant just leans over. And in the right, we see cankers, which are wood wounds in this cherry tree. So being observant of symptoms, including noting the timing and onset, whether or not they spread, and where they manifest on the plant, all provide clues toward diagnosis. And as I mentioned, master gardeners are standing by to help. If you need assistance in identifying the source of problems or have any other garden questions, they are standing by 4 days a week, Tuesday through Friday, right now just via phone and email, but soon in person. And you can send us photos. It's really helpful to have an up-close photo, a mid-range photo, and one that's further back. And any information that you can share about your garden practices or what you've noticed in the garden can be really helpful as well. Monitoring is a very simple but effective way to catch signs and symptoms early. Strolling through your garden frequently to see what your plants look like when they're healthy will help you to better detect when they aren't. So I would challenge each of you, especially on this very nice day, to go out sometime in the next week and just check in with your plants. Observe their color. Is it nice and dark green, or is it a plant that's a lighter green, or is it mottled or otherwise colored? And take nice close-up look at the branches and look at the buds. Are they budding out? And look at the tree trunks and examine their condition. Crop rotation for annual vegetables is considered a very effective control technique for avoiding pests. Pests are often host specific. That is, that they feed on only certain plants. Maybe it's just one type, like maybe they feed on only cabbage, or maybe it's an entire family, such as the brassica family, which includes cabbage, but also includes broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and mustard. If you keep growing the same kind of plant in the same place in your garden year after year, the pest population is likely to build up. But if you move your crops by family each year, putting them in the same spot no fewer than after 3 years, you can give the pest population time to dwindle. In this image, one raised bed has peppers from the Solanaceae family, while another has beans from the legume family. Next year, they can swap places. For those of us prone to forgetting such details, a garden journal can be a big help. Fruit is particularly prone to problems, such as a disease called mummyberry in the photo here. Diseases can be spread from one plant to another on your pruning tools or via insects or from infected fallen fruit or leaves. Practicing good sanitation is very important. You can disinfect your tools when moving from plant to plant using either ethanol or isopropyl alcohol at 70% or higher concentration or Lysol. And you can also reduce the incidence of infection by raking up fallen leaves, fruit, and at the end of the year. The fallen fruits release spores that get carried back into the plant or into adjacent plants by the wind. Trap cropping is the deliberate and strategic placement of plants that you know to be attractive to pests around or between plants that you wish to protect to draw the pests away from them. Another apt name for this is called sacrifice cropping. Nasturtiums, as seen in this photo, are great in this capacity. They're lovely to look at, they support pollinators, and the flowers are edible to people to boot. An Iowa State University study found that growing nasturtiums side by side with summer squash may limit damage by squash bugs. You can trap crop with radishes to trap flea beetles and cabbage maggots away from plants in the cabbage family, and mustard to attract cabbage worms. Once the pest in question takes the bait, you may remove the plant or portions of it containing insects. Don't leave the trap crop unattended for too long, or the pests will continue to reproduce and multiply, exacerbating your problem. Creating physical barriers between pests and your plants is very effective. Floating row covers are extremely effective if used properly, and that involves putting them on before you notice insect pests. They're no good if you put them on after you see the pest on your plants. You'll just be trapping them in. Row covers are very lightweight and they can be draped gently over any kind of plant without harming it. And they don't interfere with sunlight. This technique is especially helpful for flea beetles, cucumber beetles, and caterpillars. Another very effective exclusionary technique is caging for rabbits, deer, and voles. Rabbits prefer munching on young, tender growth on plants. Seedlings, including peas, beans, lettuce, and other cool season crops, are a favorite target. So protecting very young plants is a priority. For those of you dealing with moles, you have my sympathy. Moles are cool, native subterranean mammals, like few others in our ecosystem. They don't eat plants, but rather consume worms, grubs, crane fly larvae, and slugs. Their tunneling activity loosens the soil, aerating it, and mixing deeper soils with surface material, all of which improves the soil quality. But it's the tailings of their digging that they leave all over the garden or lawn that drives us crazy. Mole management is one of the toughest problems because there are few solutions that are effective, long-term, or humane. Of course, tolerating them is an option. Another one that will work in small areas, such as raised bed vegetable gardens, is the use of hardware cloth. Lining the bottom of the structure with this metal fabric will keep them from tunneling up into it. So while we're on the subject of moles, let's take one more quiz. If you want to pop up the... So which of the following statements are true? This one gets a little bit more challenging. Is it number 1, moles are blind? Is it number 2, moles can only move in the forward direction? Is it number 3, moles occur at a rate of about 20 per acre? And I've made it really challenging by giving you multiple options. And I assume folks are still working. It is a more challenging one with the multiple choices. Okay, looks like that one was challenging. So the answer is D. Moles are not blind. They have very, very tiny eyes, and they don't use them as much as they use other senses, but they're not blind. Their anatomy is adapted towards forward or backward movement. So their hair is very, very short, so that they can move through the tunnel in any direction. And they occur at rates more likely of 3 to 4 per acre. So there are a lot fewer of them than you probably think there are. All right, so we talked about cultural controls. Now we'll talk a little bit about mechanical controls. There are techniques for managing pests that include mechanical controls. They can be effective in small gardens and for when you've caught the problem early. You can put down a board and let slugs or snails hunker down in the heat of the day and pick it up, and they're yours for the taking. You can also use fingers to pick things off if you don't mind the ick factor. And a steady stream of water will dislodge some insects like aphids. So at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions before we talk about chemical management.
All right, so yeah, take this chance if you have any questions. If you want to type them in the Q&A box, we can pause and answer them. All right, looks like we're good for now, Erika, if you want to keep going.
Great.
Perfect. Oh,
So,
wait, we got one. When is the next Master Gardener class?
Actually, applications are available right now. They're available on our website or by emailing me, and we do training in the fall. So this is a good time to express interest.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go ahead and move on to chemical management. This is what we consider the last option or the least, in a regime using least toxic methods first. There are circumstances in which their use may be necessary to achieve an objective, but it's important to realize that most pests cannot be eliminated entirely, even with the use of pesticides. So a certain degree of tolerance will be necessary. And secondly, successful management through chemical options requires knowledge of a pest life cycle. This is for insects, this is for weeds, this is for any type of pest. And if a codling moth larva crawls into your apple, no amount of pesticide is going to eradicate it there. This pest would need to be chemically managed at the adult stage. So please keep that in mind anytime you're treating a pest with chemical options. Let's go ahead and define our term again here. Pesticide is any substance or mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating any pest. The term pesticide is a very broad category, and it includes subcategories such as insecticides, herbicides, molluscicides, fungicides, and rodenticides. So it is appropriate to say I'm using an herbicide or a pesticide if what you're doing is treating a weed. In the world of pesticide use, there's one simple rule that must be followed. The label is the law. It's against the law to use a pesticide for a purpose or a manner other than dictated by its label. Therefore, it's essential to read the label early and often. The example on the right illustrates the information that can be found on pesticide labels. It includes the trade name or brand name under which the product is manufactured, the product name, and the type of product that it is. It will include a list of the ingredients, and it will indicate for which pests it is to be used. So if the pest that you're attempting to manage is not listed on the label, it's not appropriate for that type of pest and should not be used. It will also include a signal word that indicates the risk category: caution, warning, or danger. This is the order in which toxicity or potential harm is increased. The label also provides instructions on what to do in the case of exposure to skin, eyes, or inhalation. Pesticides are divided by type: broad spectrum versus selective. Broad spectrum pesticides tout that they can treat many different pests at the same time, or that they're good for use if you don't know what organism is causing the harm. We've already talked about how we don't want to do those things. Selective pesticides, on the other hand, are targeted to a specific type or related group of pests. We highly discourage use of broad spectrum pesticides. The reason is that pull on that web of life, killing beneficial organisms along with pests, and also putting excess toxins into the environment. Bait stations, such as those used for ants, are very effective. They're designed to safely contain the pesticide, allowing access only by ants. Spot treating weeds rather than broadcast treating is not only effective, but avoids needless application on non-target organisms. So we highly discourage the use of weed and feed type products that apply pesticide to the entire lawn. So you may be asking yourself, what about natural or organic pesticides? When we hear these terms, natural or organic, we might envision something gentle and safe. However, these terms can be misleading, and there are no legal definitions for them in reference to pesticides. One example of a product that seems to generate a lot of interest in weed management is vinegar. People like that it can be found in their pantry, and as such, it must be safe, right? Vinegar is acetic acid, and sold in the grocery store, it's diluted to 5%. This formulation is not effective on weeds. When vinegar is sold in the garden store, it may be available at a much higher concentration, such as 20%. At this formulation, it becomes a potential hazard as it can cause skin irritation or eye damage. And even at this rate, weed kill is limited only to the portion of the weed that is sprayed, and that does not include the roots. So you will get top kill, but you will not eradicate the plant. Products that are marketed as natural or organic can be less toxic. but all pesticides, whether natural or synthetic, carry inherent risks and require safe and responsible use by the applicator. Those listed here, horticultural oils, neem oil, insecticidal soaps, and BT, are all worthy of learning more about. I suggest that you read up on them, selecting high quality sources. A source that I think very highly of is Jeff Gilman. He is a professor and author of a couple of books, The Truth About Organic Gardening and The Truth About Garden Remedies. And these books address an array of these kinds of products, and they're a very easy and enjoyable read. When using chemical pesticides, be sure to use personal protective equipment, including long sleeves and pants, gloves, footwear, and eye protection if appropriate. Keep the product in the original container. You should never transfer the product from its original labeled container to another one, because anyone who might get access to these pesticides will need access to that full label. It would be very easy to transfer a product to another container and then forget about it for a little while. This puts people who might come into contact with it at risk. Let's go ahead and launch our last quiz here, and it's on safety precautions. Which of the following are true of the safe and proper way to dispose of unwanted pesticides and other hazardous materials in Clark County? And I believe I indicated that you could choose more than one. I hope I did. It might be a little bit of a hint. Natalie, I'm not sure this will allow multiple options.
Yep, it's set up so that it should be multiple choice, and it looks like people are choosing multiple ones. So looks like it's
Good.
working well.
This was a little bit of a shameless plug because all three are true. Excellent. Thank you. So I know that was short and sweet. Are there any questions about chemical pesticides before we move on to fertilizers?
All right, while we wait for people to submit their questions into the Q&A box, I'll share some of the pre-asked questions when individuals registered. First one, are there Be Safe herbicides?
Be Safe herbicides. That's one of those things where you're going to want to read the label. Herbicides are for treating weeds, which are quite different than the system of insects. So they're not going to be as targeted as they would be for another plant. But I don't know of any offhand, just off the top of my head, but that would be one of those things that you would want to read the label.
Okay, and again, don't forget, you can submit your questions into the Q&A box that is located at the bottom of your screen. All right, another question is, are nematodes not a good method for cottle moth? And did you say only chemicals would work for that?
So nematodes are a very small microscopic worm-like organism that live in the soil. I'm not aware of any treatments for codling moth, which occurs in fruit trees as a treatment for codling moth. And no, codling moth can be treated by a number of cultural and mechanical methods. My point was just that if you're going to use a chemical option on codling moth, that you will need to do that when there's adults around and not just the larvae. Some of the cultural techniques for managing codling moth, which is kind of the classic worm in the apple, is that you can put on little nylon footies or bags around the fruit, and that'll keep them from having the eggs laid in them. There's also something called kaolin clay, which is kind of a gray kind of clay-like substance that you spray on the fruit, and then the adult insects are not able to detect the fruit and lay their eggs in them. And so those would be some of the main things that people do use in this area to keep codling moths from laying eggs in the apples. Any others?
Doesn't look like we have any yet.
Okay. Shall I go ahead and move on?
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and talk about fertilizer management. Because improper use of fertilizers can contribute to nitrogen and phosphorus pollution of streams, rivers, lakes, estuaries, and coastal waters. Let's start by defining our term again. I liked this one. A fertilizer is a substance containing one or more recognized plant nutrients designed for use or claimed to have value in promoting plant growth. These products are recognized by the display of the three-part NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium nutrient analysis on the front of the packaging. In order to be classified as a fertilizer, all three numbers must be there, even if one or more is a zero. Proper nutrient management consists of managing the rate, timing, and method of fertilizer application. So we'll talk more about what that means: rate, timing, and method. Most ornamental trees, shrubs, and perennials grow well without supplemental fertilizer. Think about trees and shrubs in the forest. They aren't fertilized, but they are getting nutrients from the soil. How? The soil is fed by the leaves, twigs, flowers, and fruits that fall and settle under them, which are broken down by earthworms, millipedes, roly-polies, and fungi and bacteria. That's why it's important to leave these items in your garden beds. If you rake them up, it may feel like you're keeping a nice clean garden, but in fact, in this case, clean is not good. Your doing so is removing these nutrients. You're also taking away insulation from cold and heat, removing water holding and retaining capacity, and leaving the area void of places for insects and other critters. So please leave your leaves. And if you want even more of a good thing, consider asking your neighbors for their leaves. You can put them on your vegetable garden beds over the winter to reduce erosion, prohibit weed germination, and add organic matter. So rate, timing, and method of fertilization for ornamentals is none. Leave that to Mother Nature. In our area for cool season grass types, the recommendation is to apply about 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. And that would be divided into 4 separate applications. The OSU Turf Pros refer to the timing as the holiday plan. This is a really good and easy way to remember how to parcel out those 4 applications. They recommend application dates falling around Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, and Thanksgiving. And this is because these times correspond with the time when cool season grass grows. And if you grass cycle or leave your clippings on the lawn, thus returning the nutrients back to the soil, you can take one of the holidays off. Southwest Washington soils are naturally abundant in phosphorus and potassium. Those are those second 2 numbers on the bag. So you really only need to choose products with that first NPK number, nitrogen. In fact, Washington State has outlawed the use of phosphorus in lawn fertilizer unless you produce a soil test indicating the need for it. Lawn fertilizers can be roughly divided by type, quick release or slow release. Quick release fertilizers are just what they sound like. They are ready to go once they're dissolved in water. The nutrients in these are considered very mobile. That is, what is not immediately taken up by the grass washes away. Slow release fertilizers are also just what they sound like. They're not readily available even when exposed to water. Their nutrients are available for uptake by plants only after some time passes. Choosing slow release types can help reduce the incidence of leaching and runoff. And this is particularly true for those with sandier soils. Slow release fertilizers are also referred to as water insoluble. As I mentioned, they didn't just dissolve in water. such as you'll see described on this fertilizer bag nutrient analysis. They may be either organic or synthetic. And so some of the terms that you might see, some of these feather meals, compost, manure, activated sewage sludge, these are organic examples of these slow release fertilizers. And then some synthetic examples on the right of slow release. These are going to generally be coated. So they're urea that are coated such that they break down more slowly. And of course, making sure to avoid allowing fertilizer to spill onto the adjacent sidewalk and street is very helpful. For those of you lucky enough to live directly adjacent to a stream or river, mitigating runoff from lawns might include creating a buffer zone between the lawn and the body of water. This could be an unmowed stand of natural grass or dense native vegetation, including native shrubs. Mowed lawn all the way to the water is accident waiting to happen. Lawn provides very little in terms of wildlife habitat. I would challenge those of you with lawns to think about whether you might reduce their size or remove them altogether. The photo on the left has a small lawn with some nice shrubs, but imagine the beauty and interest that you could achieve as if in the photo on the right, you added these lovely grasses and flowering ground covers. If you'd like a step-by-step instructions on how to replace your lawn, you can check out a recorded presentation on the Master Gardener website. Maybe you'd consider replacing a typical grass lawn with an eco lawn. Eco lawns are low input alternatives to a conventional perennial grass lawn. They provide a turf type ground cover, which tolerates typical uses of grass lawns. They're made up of a mix of broadleaf and grass species that are mutually compatible and ecologically stable. They stay green through the dry summer months. They need less water than conventional grass lawns, and they require little or no fertilizer. Example of some of these plants include yarrow and lawn daisies, and as in the pictures here. Oregon State University has done extensive research on eco lawns, and you can check out their website for helpful information on choosing the plants in an eco lawn, as well as how to install and care for them. And with this, we conclude the fertilizer portion of the talk. So I hope that you've gleaned a few tips for managing garden problems without the use of pesticides, that you've learned something about effective use of pesticides, should you deem their use necessary, and that you gained some knowledge on the efficacious use of fertilizers. I'd like to end where we began by reaffirming the interconnectedness of all of nature. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thank you so much, Erika. Again, just a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. It looks like we do have a comment from someone in the chat, and they say that they would love a link to the grass alternative training.
I don't happen to have a link with me here, but if you go to the WSU Extension Clark County Master Gardener website, we have about 25 videos that we've done in the last couple of years. So they're on the educational outreach tab.
All right, I will go to some of the pre-asked questions. This is an interesting one. How can I educate my HOA board on the negative impacts of their choices of pesticides, herbicides, or synthetic fertilizers?
That's a challenging one. Yeah, changing people's minds is definitely a little bit of a challenge, as we all know. We are happy to come out and do a talk for folks, or to provide resources that you might share with those folks in the form of handouts or links that they can read. There are certainly some low-hanging fruit that they can do, and maybe they want to just try a couple of things. So maybe if you want to reach out to our answer clinic and ask for some simple ideas on things that might kind of help get the ball rolling, is just to try a couple of different techniques.
Looks like we have another comment on wanting resources shared, which I will make a comment that part of this webinar series, we will be compiling a list of resources. So we will be reaching out to all of our speakers and compiling that list, and that will be on the Clark CD website. So that is in progress and will be posted very soon. All right, another question we had was, how can I get rid of blackberries without use of crossbow?
Yeah, so blackberries are definitely a challenge. There are a lot worse weeds that I've seen. Typically, when we provide advice on how to manage a weed, we want to give you something in writing, and we want to provide you with the resource. We have a website which is called HortSense, HortSense, and I'll provide that to Natalie. But if you just type in WSU and HortSense into an internet search, you'll find a compendium of all of the different weeds and other garden problems with extensive information on how to manage those. It will include non-chemical options as well as chemical options. But again, you'll want to really take into consideration not only the life cycle of weeds and how they reproduce and whether they're annual, biennial, or perennial, because that'll have a big impact on how you manage them, as well as how they spread. So specifically with blackberry, they are a perennial, so they live 3 or more years. They spread via seed, but they also spread, as we know, via underground and above ground canes. The good news about blackberry is that you can actually, with cutting and mowing, you can pretty quickly, within a couple of years, carbohydrate starve them. So if you can cut the canes down and then keep them mowed over, they will get tired of fighting and they will essentially give up. However, it's important to know that whenever you do any kind of weed eradication, you're going to want to have a plan for what you're going to put there when those weeds are gone, because bare soil is just an invitation for more weeds. So if you can cut them and mow them and keep them mowed for a couple of years, you should have minimal sprouting. If you disturb the soil, you will probably get some seeds that'll germinate, but those should be able to pull up pretty easily. So it will take some time and it will take some work on your end. But blackberry is actually kind of one of the ones that it's not as bad as some others. And if the blackberries are in the shade, they will also have a much harder time coming back.
Awesome, thank you. All right, last call for questions. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box. Oh, looks like we have a couple. All right, how do I eradicate English ivy?
So that's another one that in order to respond, I would definitely want to pull up that HortSense page. And so if you go to HortSense and you put in English ivy, you will find everything that we know about how to manage these. Ivy is very waxy, so herbicides are actually not even very effective on ivy. And so pulling and digging is really going to be the best and most effective way to handle that. If it's climbing up trees, you don't have to remove it all. You can just remove a section kind of at chest height, about a foot on either end, and pull it down from the trees at the lower section. But that's another one where mowing and digging is really going to be the best way to eradicate those, even better than a pesticide, because pesticides just don't stick to those.
Okay, and then we have another one. Someone asked, so they're double checking that they heard this correctly. Instead of using synthetic fertilizers for grass, I can use compost 4 times per year as a top dressing or fertilizer. I have opted out of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides from my HOA, but need to ask them for an alternative.
So compost is going to work, but it's going to take a while, because you're really building relationships when you spread compost. You're feeding the microbes, the little microscopic critters that live in there. They're going to consume those products in the compost, and then they're going to excrete the nitrogen and the nutrients that you need. So you can use compost as a fertilizer, but it will take a little while. You'll really need to enrich your soil and invest in that over time. So what you may want to do is start doing kind of half and half, do some compost or some manure or some of the other organic options, but do maybe 1 or 2 of your regular fertilizer treatments. And then as your soil just becomes really, really enriched by the compost that you're adding, you may be able to get away with either taking out the synthetic fertilizer altogether or just going to 1 or 2 applications.
Okay, and then we have a follow-up question. Can I use redworm castings? It is a very small patch of grass.
I would dilute it if you use worm castings. I would, dissolve that in water and use just a very dilute version of that. Really anything organic like that, whether it's regular compost or vermicompost, will help, stimulate that microbial activity. So you're welcome to use that. But again, you're going to need to kind of work on that over time because it's not going to have that quick effect. You're going to need to slowly build up that population of those microorganisms that are consuming that organic matter to provide you with the nutrients that you need.
All right, well, it looks like we're coming up on time for the hour. So I'm going to end it there. Erika, thank you so much for such an informative and fantastic talk. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And just a reminder, we have 2 more weeks of this webinar series. Next week is Pet Waste at Home, and the final week is on backyard habitats. So please join us then. And again, thank you, Erika, for joining us.
Thank you.